Alright everyone, it's time for a little bit of a response video here. This goes out to Hannah Reloaded, actually on Twitter, so making a couple of tweets responding to something I initially tweeted out. Let me give you that tweet verbatim so that nobody says that there's any word mincing going on. Here was my tweet. Name something that more government improved that wasn't initially a problem created by government prior. Of course, I add, pro tip, this unicorn don't exist. And it doesn't, as we will see, because here's a two-tweet response with some things that supposedly more government, created and improved that weren't actually government problems to begin with. And in most cases, this falls under the blanket of things that the private market could handle better. Of course, I'm a libertarian, which means, a realist. I understand history. In some cases, though, these are actually points where the government created the problem, as I posited, and then the government sells you snake oil, basically, to solve the problem that government itself created in the first place. So we'll go through these. Number one, roads and infrastructure. Now, I hear the who will build the roads argument all the time in relation to belief in smaller government. The idea that more and more government has made better roads falls short when you realize that the heyday of road construction was almost a century ago, and that more and more government has been created since then, and the roads in a lot of places in this world are fucking dilapidated. As I've pointed out, if you look at like a government road crew, state level usually what you have is four guys standing around talking and smoking and drinking, watching a fifth man slowly shovel gravel into a pothole. Roads were created long before strong central government, even like the interstate highway system, which was pointed out by another individual actually, as a government program that worked. Okay. There were roads between states before the interstate highway system. If anything, the interstate highway system, while it definitely increases the efficiency of the movement of goods from one main hub to another, bypasses small-town America by and large and actually put a lot of people out of business. It destroyed a lot of communities, actually, and was incepted predominantly for the idea that, hey, the Soviets might use the atom bomb on us at any given time. People need to be able to evacuate more efficiently. These old road systems aren't really built for that. We need a highway system so people can get away from the cities. As well as the idea that they're literally built for the landing of small planes. Like a local plane can land on the interstate highways as well. These could easily have been built, and probably would have anyway, for economic purposes between states, even if there were no federal government in the U.S. Keep in mind, of course, the states are semi-sovereign entities anyway. Well, there's plenty of highways here in Europe. They're still being built between countries, despite the fact that technically there's no central authority that incepted them. They existed long ago, before the EU existed. Well, how the hell did they come to be? It's for economic reasons. People tend to do things in their own self-interest. People were making roads and clearing trees and brush and shit hundreds and hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. They did not need a central impetus to do so. If anything, the central authority often tells them, no, you can't build a road here, despite the fact that it's more efficient, because some city or some group, some industry has paid them to prevent that from happening. Number two, the space race. This is an interesting point, actually, and it's more salient than many of them. Yes, in the sense of the 50s and 60s, of course, or the 70s, much of it was centrally funded. But at the time, there was no technological corporation capable of doing what now Tesla does, doing what Amazon is doing what other companies, Virgin, is doing. Now private companies have taken the fore, and they've already made leaps and bounds that NASA never did. This has happened multiple times. You'll get Tesla becoming the first rocket to successfully re-enter Earth's atmosphere after being in space and be salvageable enough to be reused. That wasn't a government thing. It's regulated by the government because the government sticks its nose in everything, but it was a private company that pulled it off. Again, after much trial and error. I loved it, by the way, and this is just an aside. When people are like, oh, corporations can't do anything right, and they're watching like a rocket blow up on the pad, have you seen the compilations of the rockets made in the 1950s and 60s doing that? Oh, there's plenty more material where that came from. So that's been semi-privatized at this point. Number 3, public education for everyone. The alternative is no education for the poor. I don't disagree with the concept of a public education system. This is something on which I actually spar with certain more puristic libertarians on. What I have a problem with is that we took a very good working system, which was mainly state-run, and we decided to subjugate it more and more to the federal government. Again, the federal government, more and more layers of it, making it worse. Now we have No Child Left Behind and Common Core and all these other pieces of crap, making the educational system not better, but worse. If more government was going to make it better, one would expect that our top 10 slot would be now beyond top 10. We should be, in the space age, literally. We should be on hoverboards and riding jetpacks around because of our educational attainment. That simply hasn't happened. More government has actually, at some point, made it less and less efficient and dumbed it down. You have governments, state and federal at this point, literally doing just that. We have, the state of Oregon or some of the cities out there doing away with the AP system. Now, the AP system provides an outlet for people who are high functioning, who are very good in one or more fields. One kid might take, AP Science, AP Bio, AP Physics. Another one AP Math, another one might be really interested in English, they take AP English or something. Those courses are being denigrated too, in the name of wokeness specifically, as the result of decisions being made by government officials, either local or state level. Again, more government has not helped that situation. If you look at some of the states with higher educational attainment, you'll find less bureaucracy actually. You'll find that those states have an older style school system. The schools don't look like prisons, in other words, like a very, very centralized system like you'd have in Texas, which has an intermediate system, California, whose system by and large sucks unless you're rich. The funny thing is that actually in the system we have now, the wealthy get way, way further ahead than the public education system because they use private schools and they use tutors and things like that. So what really has changed? There's still an inequality between the rich and the poor. It's just that you've changed it from being more systemic and more public to being, separated from that by, half of a league or something like that. Safety regulations. And this I'll actually lump in with the 5th point, which is a ban on child labor. Safety regulations, child labor, things of that nature come around in the progressive era. This is early 20th century. But again, the government caused the problem in the first place. The fact that there were no safety regulations, that 10-year-olds were working in mines and stuff, was largely prefaced on the fact of carpetbagging. Now, carpetbagging is something that unless you took like an AP US history course, you probably never even fucking heard of. In the late 1800s especially, but in the wake of the Civil War in general, what happened is that politicians were jury-rigged into positions, specifically from the North. It was based partially on Civil War-era loyalty. And they started getting a lot of money from rail barons, coal barons, steel barons, and so forth. And they one hand washed the other. The state, which is to say the politicians, the elected officials with legal authority, would often use police forces and other means to try to suppress the competitors of the groups that were donating to them. We still see this today. Why do you think Citizens United is still a thing? What happened is that monopolies formed because it was a non-capitalistic, less competitive system in which an upstart would either be subsumed, that was the your best case scenario, or it would be smushed out of existence by some thugs that would burn your printing press or beat up your workers, and you'd be driven out of town. And so in a lot of industrial areas, the government created the problem once again. The monopolies formed because the government helped them to form. The government then sold people the idea of more regulations to take care of the problem that the government itself had created in the first place. Banning legalized racial discrimination. Also interesting. Racial discrimination in the wake of the end of slavery, Jim Crow, comes about largely because of industrialists, in one sense. Gun control is paired with this through the Cruikshank decision of the 1870s, actually. And what happened is, again, the government legalized the discrimination. A ban on legalized racial discrimination, that doesn't happen until fairly recently. The government for almost 100 years kicked that can down the road. The government also incepted slavery as being legal in multiple states. Well, the government created the problem. So the government is solving, once again, a problem that the government itself had allowed to occur, had created in effect. Social Security. I barely even need to address this. You mean that perpetually insolvent social program that should be able to be opted out of? I don't have a problem with Social Security in the sense that people who want to opt into it should be able to pay more money. And then, when they're older, they should be able to get a pension, essentially. It's essentially a centralized pension fund. It's fine. No problem with that. What I would say is people should be able to opt out of it. And again, more and more layers of government keep borrowing from Social Security and making it insolvent. Every 10 years or so, we have a little mini panic about Social Security is going to be insolvent in the future. Then we end up throwing more taxpayer money at it that wasn't paid in because Congress took a bunch of money out, making it again insolvent over and over. Another example of the government doing such a wonderful job at addressing the problems that government itself created. The post office. This is actually constitutionally guaranteed. Post office, no problem with it. Has more layers of government made the post office faster, or has it barely kept up with its private competitors? UPS, FedEx, and so forth. No. You can get same-day shipping with Amazon. You can say that their working conditions suck or their factories are basically slavery. You can use whatever platitudes and hyperbole you want, but there are definitely faster alternatives to the U.S. postal system. The post office, yes, it's legally incepted in the Constitution of the United States. Perfectly fine. Who cares? That being said, again, the private alternative is usually better. Costs a little bit more, but is faster. Maybe it costs a little bit less, but it's a couple days slower. Pick your poison. You have that consumer's choice, and that's the wonderful thing about it. Those private alternatives are simply better. You can lowball it, and you can do it cheaper. You can decide to pay a little bit extra, and it gets there faster. I'm failing to see the problem, and I'm failing to see how more big government has made the post office reasonably better. Really, if anything, private technological advances used by the post office have made things faster, but again, it's just in line with the private marketplace. Subsidizing the development of tech like the internet. Oh, I think that you mean the very, very early pre-internet internet that was developed by the U.S. military. It's interesting how the government didn't decide to make that public for half a century. Now, more government really helped with that one. We could have had essentially the internet back in the goddamn 1970s, but they decided to keep it basically military, government, and academic facilities, and that was it. Isn't until the 90s that you get home internet. Very, very interesting, right? Medicare. You mean that lowballing institution that considerably screws everyone that's part of it? Nobody likes Medicare. Nobody even pretends that it's likable, so I don't know exactly where the win is there. Food stamps. Now this is one that actually makes sense. Of course, food stamps do bring a return. But again, most people weren't starving before food stamps were developed. This is a war on poverty program that was incepted later. It has done good, but as we see yet again, more and more government adding on to it has not made the program better. They marginally increase or decrease the amount of food stamps, the amount of regulatory hurdles you have to go through to get the food stamps. Why don't you just issue people literal stamps? They used to do that, by the way. It's called food stamps for a reason. Now you get a little cash card and it comes with a bunch of caveats. By the way, part of this is cronyistic in form. Have you ever been on food stamps? I'll assume the answer is probably no. I was briefly years and years ago when I was very down and out. I'm not proud of that fact, but it is a good program. I found it very, very funny that you could buy Red Bull with food stamps, but you couldn't buy a Monster Energy drink. Let's just put it that way. Very, very mysterious why that happened. The minimum wage. The minimum wage is a goddamn joke. If you raise it, then the wages, they rise. Of course, people that were making a bit more than minimum wage then will be very, very sad because now they're more impoverished than they were before. Because the amount of goods being created has not increased, and because the overall value of all goods is the same, barring inflation, what you've really done is taken people that are a little bit above minimum wage and smushed them down with the very, very poor. You've very slightly uplifted the very poor, and you've really screwed people that were just outside of that poverty. That's all that the minimum wage does. And it's all that we'll ever do. And if you lower it, well, that doesn't make any difference. It doesn't matter what you do because supply and demand still exists. The national parks. You mean those trash-filled edifices of nothingness that the government routinely shuts down when there's a budget battle? That the government neglects, or that it lords over people pretending that it's so great? You mean those areas of nature that are hyper-regulated tourist traps? Yeah, that's really wonderful. It's a big win for big government. See, the problem is that those were incepted long, long ago when the government was far smaller anyway. You don't need a big government, or certainly more government than we have now, in order to administer a national park system. All you have is you have some wardens there that tell people don't shoot the bears, just, let them eat you. And that's basically what it is. It's a whole lot of nothing. It's nature. And bored urbanites go there to pretend that they're roughing it because they've got their $5,000 air-conditioned tent, and it's a bunch of horse shit basically. The FDIC, who gives a shit, literally. The FDA, the FDA, that group that keeps approving Johnson & Johnson's products and approved oxycodone for general use for people, and totally took seriously the pharma companies when they said, don't worry, it's not that addictive. Yeah, creating several million fucking heroin junkies. The FDA that until recently didn't approve the vax for COVID. Now it does, but there are still caveats involved. The FDA that approved thalidomide for, I believe it was pregnant women for the pangs of birthing, or whatever it was. The FDA that keeps changing the food pyramid on a fucking goddamn constant basis, that told people in my generation, hey, you should get 11 servings of grains every day. Don't worry if they're refined. Eat your pasta, kids. That FDA. And government, yeah, that's a success. The U.S. Weather Service. Nikola Tesla once developed a device, this is 100 years ago, that could tell if lightning was approaching from about 100 miles away. Are you telling me there would be no weather alerts if the federal government didn't administer them? Like the states don't give a shit about the weather? Like they wouldn't incept a conjunctive service anyway? Of course they would. Again, because it's profitable. It's not that expensive. You can see that the hurricane's coming. Of course they would administer such a service. Having it centralized doesn't even require a federal government to exist. The states themselves voluntarily could create a centralized hub very easily for such things. Localities could do the same thing. A lot of most of those people that tell you about the Doppler weather radar on TV, you realize they're not like federal scientists or anything like that. By the way, it's interesting, you're admitting the U.S. Weather Service is centrally funded. It's funny then, because the U.S. Weather Alerts, NOAA of course, are available on multiple tech sites that routinely ban U.S. citizens from using them. Guess it sucks to be them when the next tornado's coming, right? I guess they should only engage in right think. GPS. No, I'm pretty sure that GPS is not entirely centrally based, but good try. I'm pretty sure that satellites are put up by private companies now too on a regular basis. And what the fuck does that have to do with needing more federal government? A very, very scant one could easily put a satellite into orbit. The same as like the space race and stuff. You don't need to load the government with more regulatory authority to create these things. That's one of my main points. FEMA. Oh, the FEMA that abandoned the people of Louisiana after Katrina? Yeah, wonderful. Or the FEMA that responds to disasters but largely defers to the states. FEMA is largely an advisory organization. Do you even know what FEMA does? Federal Emergency Management. They help coordinate, but the response is by and large not FEMA. They're bare bones insofar as their own employees. They help to coordinate the state response and the local response. Well, they could be coordinated much more cheaply. FEMA didn't even exist not that long ago, and really, technically speaking, is not necessary. People managed to get through the tornado. People managed to survive the flood. Believe it or not, the federal government wasn't responsible for their survival. Back in the old days, back in our grandparents' time, people used to have storm shelters and shit like that. They prepped on their own. The survivorship was probably higher. The fact that people sit in their apartment and they say, well, I've got 5 cans of beans, so I'm all good through this next hurricane, probably gets more people killed because they become reliant upon the government to save them when they should be saving themselves. Funding scientific research. Oh yeah, like when they spent millions of dollars on the mating and life cycle of the mayfly or something like that. Or shrimps on treadmills, I remember was a meme like 10 years ago. Yeah, scientific grants. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes they're fucking horseshit. Again, this hit or miss sort of situation wastes a huge amount of money. Many of these sort of programs, I mean, they give like money to the arts as well, not just scientific research. We gave you $100,000 because of your new art display, shit on a canvas. Well, that's wonderful. I'm sure the taxpayers would definitely not line item veto that if they got the chance. And then, this isn't hard. Well, yeah, it is hard because literally none of your examples stand up to scrutiny. Not a single example of a problem that was solved by more government and that didn't stem from government itself. Safety regulations, stuff like that, perfectly great, but the government created the problem. In other cases, private industry, like with the space race, has already taken up the slack. In other cases, you're talking like with the post office, you're talking about a public edifice that is outcompeted both on the end of cheapness and on the end of efficiency by private alternatives. So government didn't solve any problems. More government didn't solve anything. Here's what I believe. I believe that the federal government, I'm not talking about the states, but the federal government incepted in the United States, predominantly its role is field a military to prevent abuse from without, and have an armed populace, that certainly helps, and maintain a court system basically to prevent abuse from within. That's basically all it needs to do. And diplomatic wrangling with other states to make sure that free trade is achieved. Other than that, the federal government can fuck itself. There's no real purpose to it. Most of these things that you're talking about, any problems that they address, were created by the government or were more easily addressed by private groups. So you just proved my point. So thank you very much for that. So yes, this was a response video, a slightly long response video. And I just thought I'd create it. I was going to do it tomorrow, but then I'm like, well, I've already got 4 videos lined up for tomorrow. What the fuck do I do? Well, I look kind of cool lit just by this one lamp, so it looks sort of like a fireside chat. I guess I'm FDR now. That's about all. Peace out.